We're looking at sagebrush, and we're looking at quite a lot of sagebrush. Millions of acres, mountain after mountain. I own 61 acres out here, and just one point I want to emphasize that I sustainably harvest sage. When I do harvest sage, I'm not actually on my property right now, I'm just visiting someone. However, I wanted to make the point that there's a lot of sage around, and this is an area where there's plenty of it. If anyone knows anything about sage, please let me know. What I have on my actual property, see my other videos, is old growth sage, which means the stems, instead of being like this, my stems are more like this, and they're 200-year-old or more plants likely. This is extremely green. Honestly, can't tell you as a fact that that's sage versus this, which is more blue. In my opinion, I'm still learning and studying all this, that it goes through different stages in its life cycle and or season. I'm not sure if it's a seasonal thing or a life cycle thing where after 2 or 3 years it starts turning blue, just like bark on a tree, or that there's also companion plants that coincidentally, grow right next to it that look similar, that could be sweetgrass or some other type of plant, or also could be female versus male. What I do know is that these are extremely fresh shoots coming out of the bush versus older stalk, which, to give an example, there's some over here which are much smaller leaves and much smaller bushes, even though they might be many years older. So if we look at these right here, this is distinctively, smells like sage, but at the same time is, only inches off the ground. And again, to emphasize, my property has more woodier type sage. As you can see, this branch right here, as a better example, is extremely thick, like a tree branch. So anyway, again, to make the point, I have enough sage to go around, and I'm not pulling up the only sage in existence. These things here are called galls. That is actually a parasitical growth, similar to the mistletoe. Bugs and stuff chew into the stems and cause it to malform, basically, and it puts off chemicals in defense that it wouldn't normally make, which creates a whole nother substance, which are called galls. Sagebrush is not the only plant that does that. A lot of different plants do that, and people actually use them for medicinal values and purposes. The galls are interesting because they actually get put the bugs that chew on them will actually plant their seeds, or their eggs and stuff in them, little midges and mites type of insect. But then wasp will come along and they'll chew it open or inject their own eggs into the midges' eggs or inside the gall. So instead of the midges flying out, little baby wasps fly out. Don't quote me on that specifically, do some research, but it's fascinating. The life cycle of everything needs to survive, and sometimes the only way one thing survives is by being a parasite and something eating it, and then the enzymes in the stomach somehow, create the process that allows it to get to the next stage. Funguses and parasites and viruses and bacteria all typically need a companion host of some sort in order to survive. So anyway, feel free to see my other videos on sage. And another thing about sage is that this is not actually, I keep saying sage, but it's sagebrush, which is, a generic word for very long, fancy Latin words, which mean that it's actually related to the sunflower plant and not sage. So your garden sage that people grow in their garden for culinary purposes and spices is different. However, it's all used for the same purpose, and this sage is burned for ceremonial purposes, for many different medicinal purposes, and has a lot of different values, including the wood. Burning the sage and or the wood will create, a very heavy smoke, which, can cleanse the air of viruses, bacterias, and mosquitoes, and antibacterial and insecticide, and is good for asthma. It is the main constitute active ingredient alkaloid inside of sagebrush is camphor, which is the main ingredient in most asthma medicines and different things when you're using your inhaler, for instance. So the next time, you want to pop a pill or rub something on you, or, inhale some type of chemical toxic product that the government or doctor gives you, think about just having a ceremonial fire with some sagebrush. Anyway, at the same time, I don't know that you'll be able to get sagebrush, even though I'm showing you millions of acres of it, and on my property I have pieces that are thicker than my arm. It's just not available for the average person. This is blue sagebrush versus white sagebrush. Wiccans, witches, and people that practice spiritual ceremonial stuff will tell you and give you a long list of different spells and whatever you want to call their ceremonies and stuff that they practice, that different plants that they burn or draw with or do certain things with that will provide certain different spells, and you can look deeper into that. But just to add them in, that's another group of people and culture that use sagebrush for different practices, and they'll use the blue sagebrush versus the white sagebrush versus different colors for different black sagebrush for different reasons. I just happen to be a naturalist, forager type person, and to add to that, in the Amazon jungle and indigenous plains peoples and people all over the world that are indigenous in the old days and or current, they're shamans, they're doctors, they're plant doctor people that would provide healing benefits to them, to the tribe, and to the culture. Did not travel across the country or to other regions and interact with other people in a traditional time in order to get medicines. They just went out in their field, in their area. This is my area, so say within the top of that mountain to, the perimeter of this plains here would be your area, and so you would know all the plants in this area, and those are the only plants that you would use. So a lot of so-called civilized cultured people, they definitely have plant medicine and understanding of indigenous peoples wrong. There is no such one medicine that cures or heals for any one human race. That's just not realistic. The human race is one race all over the world. It's the same race, and yet each culture and each indigenous tribe never met each other, and they practiced different medicine and different spiritual beliefs and different gods, and they never interacted with each other, and they never believed in each other's gods, and they never practiced each other's religions or cultural beliefs until more modern times. And that, as you may know, has to do more with the civilized first world countries, without naming off everybody, and racial issues, but had to do with world wars and conquering, and once certain peoples conquered other people and became superpower countries and boats and started shipping people and slaves and stuff, and they congregated and genocided out peoples. And that's when peoples of indigenous nature started meeting the greater outside world. Until this current day, there's still civilizations and cultures that indigenous people practice in their cultural belief system that is unique to them and only in their environment. And that's why I mentioned the Amazon, which is this huge, jungle that goes through many, many different countries in South America. And there are many, many different tribes and cultures in the Amazon that do not know each other, are not interested in each other, and like all indigenous peoples, are likely warring tribes that would kill each other on sight and rape, pillage their neighboring tribe and get their women and or kill their children, and had no interest in brotherly love, or we're all indigenous peoples. That's just not realistic. All humans are conquerors by nature, and all animals and all plants are conquerors by nature. And this plant right now is growing up 3 or 4 feet, and it's shading out the grass that's on the other side of it, which is stopping that grass from growing 3 or 4 feet, which is then sucking up all the water that the plant that's smaller than that needs it to live. These plants are conquering each other as is. This sage is a survivor. It's the strongest of the pecking order out here, so that's why you see it. Think about that. It's the strongest of the pecking order. That it's killed off in some sort of way or survived where other things have died. Juniper trees were abundant out here. You can see them all over the mountains, but they've been killed off by man, so-called civilized people. Otherwise, these plains right now would be covered with juniper trees. And to add to that, the plains that we're standing on are actually a lake bed that has been drained dry by man. And so you can't see it from here, but right here in the close distance are rice farmers, which, yes, we're not in China and or anywhere where the average person eats rice. However, this is where rice is grown because it's cheap for industry to come out here and buy hundreds of acres of land, and with little, debate from anybody in society, because there's nobody out here to tell them what to do, and they're able to suck up the water table and grow crops that would not normally grow, like almonds, like rice, and it takes hundreds of thousands or millions of gallons of water. They flood 100-acre area at a time. They need to flood the plains in order to provide the environment for rice that would normally be in Asian countries, for instance, because they have a lot of wetlands there, specifically. The cultural thing is for a reason. Again, Asians eat rice because rice grows there easily. It's the same point of the Amazons having access to local plants. There are doctors, for instance, that practice, and study plants, only study the plants, again, that's in their area. So that tribe is going to be able to cure their medical problem, and the next tribe on the other side of the mountain range is going to be able to cure the exact same medical problem, but they've never heard of each other, and they've never practiced each other's beliefs. So in our civilized culture, we have only one aspirin or one ibuprofen or one, type of this or that. And we don't really consider that people are actually able to, or there's plants that might be 1,000 different plants or 1,000 different ways to provide that same medicine instead of any one person. And so that person is actually an entity, which is actually a corporation, which is actually has a patent on that drug that they created in their laboratory, which is why they don't use plants. Anyway, all this ranting has to do with how I collect sage, so people are aware. Okay, have a great day.